conflict is not the enemy. Disconnection is. When two people come together, two histories, two wounds, two desires, there will be friction. But it is not the presence of conflict that breaks us. It is the unconscious way we enter it. We repeat the same patterns, the same reactions, the same defenses, expecting peace to come from habits that were born in chaos. Today, you are invited to fight, but to fight smarter, with intention, with dignity, with awareness. So many arguments begin long before the first word is spoken. They begin in our unspoken fears, the fear of not being heard, the fear of not being enough, the fear that our vulnerability will be used against us. And so we armor up, we defend, we attack, we withdraw, we shut down. We raise our voice not because we are strong, but because we feel small. But what if conflict became the place where you rise, not shrink? What if every disagreement became an opportunity to build, not break? When you feel the heat rising in your chest, pause. That moment is sacred. It is the space where you choose who you want to be, not the wounded child who learned to protect at all costs, but the conscious adult who seeks truth, not triumph. You can name what is happening without tearing down the person in front of you. You can say, "We are falling into the old pattern," instead of "You always do this." Awareness is not weakness, it is mastery. Seek understanding before you seek victory. Curiosity is a balm for the heart. Ask, what are you really trying to say? Instead of preparing your next defense, ask, where is this coming from? Instead of assuming the worst. When curiosity enters the room, ego quietly steps out, and suddenly the other person is no longer the enemy. They are a human being trying to be seen just like you, and beneath every heated word lies something softer, a need, a longing, a wound asking to be acknowledged. When you fight smarter, you speak to the need, not the noise. You address the longing, not the anger. You listen not only to what was said, but to what was meant. You begin to understand that love is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of repair. Do not let your assumptions guide you. They are built from old stories, old pain, old memories that no longer serve the person you are becoming. Replace assumptions with questions. Replace defensiveness with clarity. Replace the desire to win with the desire to understand. You are not here to defeat each other. You are here to evolve together. Arguments will happen, but you can choose the energy with which you enter them. Choose unity over ego, connection over pride, purpose over pettiness. When you commit to awareness, compassion, and truth, even conflict becomes a doorway to deeper intimacy. Today, let your communication reflect wisdom. Let your reactions reflect maturity. Let your intentions reflect the divine principle that every relationship is a sacred mirror, showing you not just who the other person is, but who you have the potential to become. Fight, yes, but fight with consciousness, fight with humility, fight with the courage to grow, and watch how your relationships transform. Not because they are free of conflict, but because you have learned how to navigate conflict with grace, strength, and soul. Pausing before reacting is one of the most powerful disciplines a person can cultivate, yet it is also one of the most overlooked. In moments of tension, our bodies tighten, our minds race, and our emotions surge. We feel an urgency to respond, to defend, to correct, to retaliate. But this urgency is almost never wisdom speaking. It is fear, ego, or old wounds taking the microphone. The pause is the doorway that leads you out of that reactive state and into your higher self. When conflict arises, the nervous system often interprets it as danger. Even a simple disagreement can feel like an emotional threat. The body floods with adrenaline, the heart rate increases, and the instinctive reaction, fight, flight, or freeze, kicks in. Without awareness, we react from the same patterns we learned in childhood or from previous relationships. We snap, we shut down, we lash out, or we walk away. These reactions protect us in the moment but harm the relationship in the long run. The pause disrupts this automatic cycle. It gives your brain the space it needs to move from survival to presence, from defense to intention. This pause is not silence born from withdrawal. It is not shutting down or avoiding. It is conscious stillness, a soft interruption where you take a breath and reconnect with yourself. It is in this small space that you can ask profound questions. What am I really feeling? What am I trying to protect? What do I truly want in this moment, to be right or to be understood? When you pause, you move from reacting to choosing. You reclaim your power instead of handing it over to old emotional habits. In that momentary pause, you can feel the first wave of emotion rising: anger, hurt, frustration, disappointment. You let yourself feel it without letting it control your next word. It is the space where you acknowledge, something inside me is activated. Instead of acting from that activation, you observe it with compassion. This shift alone can prevent hours of unnecessary conflict. The pause allows you to see that the intensity inside you may not be about the current situation at all. It may be echoing past experiences, fears, or unmet needs that haven't yet been named. The pause also invites the other person into a safer space. When you do not react impulsively, you signal calm. You create an atmosphere where communication is possible instead of war. Often, it only takes one grounded person to shift the entire dynamic of a conversation. When you pause, you are not only protecting the relationship, you are modeling emotional maturity that can inspire the other to rise to the same level. This practice is a form of self-respect. It is a way of saying, I deserve to respond from my dignity, not my distress. It honors your emotional intelligence and your spiritual grounding. The pause reconnects you with the purpose behind the relationship: love, growth, partnership, unity. It reminds you that the person in front of you is not your enemy. They are a human being with their own fears, their own longing to be understood. In the pause, you can evaluate the intention behind your next words. Will they contribute to healing or to harm? Will they build a bridge or burn one? Will they open the heart or close it? This is where true maturity is born, not in perfection, but in the ability to choose awareness over impulse. Pausing before reacting is not an easy habit. It requires practice, humility, and patience. But every time you do it, you strengthen the muscles of wisdom. You become someone who doesn't just survive conflict, you transform it. You create conversations that honor your values and relationships that reflect your highest self. In truth, the pause is a small act with massive impact. It is where clarity is born, where connection is protected, and where you choose the future of your relationship one thoughtful breath at a time. Naming the pattern instead of the person is one of the most transformative shifts you can make in any relationship, because it moves the conversation away from blame and toward awareness. When conflict arises, people often point fingers: you always do this, you never listen, you're impossible, or this is your fault. These statements may feel satisfying in the moment, but they do nothing to build connection. Instead, they trigger defensiveness, shut down vulnerability, and push both people deeper into their corners. Naming the pattern changes the entire emotional landscape of the conversation. It says, we are stuck in something together, not you are the problem. Every relationship develops patterns over time, patterns of communication, patterns of reacting, patterns of withdrawing or escalating. Most of the time, we don't consciously choose these patterns. They're subconscious habits we learn through our upbringing, past relationships, or protective behaviors that once served us but now harm us. When a disagreement arises, we default into these familiar dances. One person may raise their voice, the other may shut down. One may pursue, the other may retreat. One may become logical and cold, the other emotional and overwhelmed. These patterns repeat not because the people are bad, but because the patterns are unconscious. Naming them brings them into the light. When you say, I think we are falling into that same loop again, you are no longer attacking the person's character. You are identifying the dynamic. That simple shift softens the emotional intensity. Instead of one person feeling accused, both people feel invited into reflection. It creates space for collaboration instead of conflict. It becomes a shared challenge rather than a personal failure. Naming the pattern allows both people to step back and observe what is happening with greater honesty. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer you versus me, but us versus this behavior. That alone is a powerful act of unity. It reminds both individuals that they are partners, not opponents. Instead of tearing each other down, they can work together to understand the cycle, interrupt it, and choose a healthier alternative. This practice requires humility. It requires the willingness to admit that the pattern involves both people. Even if one partner initiates the reaction, the other contributes to it by responding in predictable ways. A pattern cannot continue without participation from both sides. Acknowledging this truth transforms blame into accountability. It encourages both partners to ask, What is my role here? What can I do differently? Naming the pattern also increases emotional intelligence. When you identify the dynamic, you learn to separate the person from their behavior. You learn to see that the other person is not acting out of malice, but out of habit, fear, or emotional overwhelm. Their behavior is not who they truly are. It is a response they developed long before this moment. This understanding brings compassion into the conversation. It softens your heart. It keeps the relationship anchored in love even during difficult moments. When the pattern is named, you can identify the deeper need beneath it. For example, a partner who gets louder may simply want to feel heard. A partner who withdraws may be seeking safety because they feel overwhelmed. Naming the pattern allows you to see past the behavior into the vulnerability hidden beneath it. You begin to understand not only what is happening, but why. This practice also empowers both people to create new patterns. Once you can say, we tend to escalate quickly, or we fall into silent distance, you can consciously choose a different approach. You can decide together to slow down, breathe, or take a brief pause. You can agree to speak softer or check in more gently. Awareness gives you options. Blame keeps you trapped. Naming the pattern is an act of maturity. It is an act of wisdom. It demonstrates that you value the relationship more than being right. And every time you do it, you expand the space for healing, for growth, and for deeper connection. Seeking understanding before victory is a profound principle that has the power to transform conflict into connection. Too often, in moments of disagreement, our minds are consumed with proving ourselves right. We are so focused on defending our perspective, asserting our point of view, or winning the argument that we forget the most essential part of communication: truly hearing the other person. When we prioritize victory over understanding, every interaction becomes a battlefield and the other person becomes an opponent rather than a partner. But when we shift our focus from winning to understanding, the entire dynamic changes. Suddenly, conflict becomes an opportunity for insight, empathy, and growth. To seek understanding first, we must cultivate curiosity. Curiosity is the antidote to judgment. It allows us to ask questions rather than make assumptions. It invites the other person to share their inner world without fear of attack. Instead of thinking, I have to prove I'm right, we can ask, can you help me understand what you mean, or what is driving your feelings in this moment? These questions do more than clarify facts. They demonstrate respect and openness. They communicate that the relationship is more important than the argument itself, that connection is more valuable than ego. Understanding before victory also requires listening with presence. True listening is active and intentional. It is not waiting for your turn to speak or planning your rebuttal while the other person talks. It is immersing yourself in their words, tone, and body language. It is noticing the emotions beneath the words, the frustration, sadness, or fear that may be driving their reaction. When we listen deeply, we honor the humanity of the other person. We recognize that their perspective, even if different from ours, is valid and meaningful. This acknowledgement alone can reduce defensiveness and soften tension, creating a fertile ground for resolution. When we seek understanding first, we also develop patience. Victory is often urgent, immediate, and short-sighted, but understanding requires time and space. It requires slowing down, stepping back, and allowing the conversation to unfold without forcing a conclusion. Patience allows us to see patterns that might otherwise be invisible. We can recognize recurring triggers, identify underlying needs, and understand the emotional context that fuels the disagreement. By doing so, we move from reactive communication to intentional dialogue. Another critical aspect of seeking understanding is humility. We must recognize that our perspective, while valid, is not absolute. We may be blind to certain dynamics, unaware of our contributions to the conflict, or misinterpreting the other person's intentions. Approaching the conversation with humility allows us to be open to learning, to being corrected, and to evolving. It acknowledges that the relationship is more complex than any single argument, and that growth often requires us to step beyond pride and ego. Seeking understanding first also transforms the emotional tone of the interaction. When victory is the goal, conversations are filled with tension, defensiveness, and blame. When understanding is the goal, the energy shifts to curiosity, empathy, and collaboration. Conflict becomes a shared exploration rather than a clash of wills. Both people feel seen, heard, and respected, even when they disagree. This emotional safety is essential for building trust and intimacy over time. Finally, prioritizing understanding before victory lays the foundation for long-term harmony. It allows both people to learn from each disagreement rather than being trapped in repetitive cycles of frustration. It nurtures a culture of respect, emotional intelligence, and shared responsibility. When both partners commit to understanding first, they create a relational environment where differences are navigated with grace, challenges are approached with wisdom, and connection is preserved even in the face of conflict. In essence, seeking understanding before victory is a conscious choice to rise above instinctual reactions. It is a commitment to compassion over competition, insight over impulse, and relationship over ego. By embracing this principle, we transform conflict from a destructive force into a teacher, a mirror, and a bridge to deeper connection. Beneath the surface of almost every argument lies a deeper truth that often goes unnoticed. The words we hear are rarely the whole story. Disagreements are rarely about the explicit content of what is being said. They are almost always about an unspoken need, a hidden fear, or a wound that is seeking recognition. When we learn to address the real wound beneath the words, we move from reacting to understanding, from battling to connecting. This approach transforms conflict into an opportunity for empathy, healing, and growth. Human beings are wired to protect themselves. When a need goes unmet or a fear is triggered, the brain perceives danger, and we respond with defensiveness, anger, withdrawal, or criticism. In those moments, the behavior we display is rarely a conscious choice. It is a protective mechanism. One partner might snap with sharp words, not because they truly want to hurt, but because they feel unseen or unheard. Another might retreat into silence, not out of indifference, but out of fear of being overwhelmed or rejected. When we focus only on the words and the surface-level behavior, we often misinterpret these responses as attacks, and the argument escalates. The first step in addressing the real wound is learning to listen beneath the noise. This requires paying attention not only to what is being said, but to how it is said, to the body language, tone, and emotional undertone. Anger, sarcasm, defensiveness, or withdrawal are signals pointing to an unmet need or unresolved fear. When we shift our attention from the attack to the message beneath it, we begin to see the vulnerability that is often hidden by the armor of words. The person in front of us is not our enemy. They are a human being signaling a longing, a hurt, or a desire for connection. Once we recognize the underlying wound, empathy becomes possible. Empathy does not mean condoning harmful behavior, nor does it mean surrendering our boundaries. It means acknowledging the reality of the other person's experience and understanding the pain that drives their reactions. This act of recognition diffuses defensiveness, opens the door to dialogue, and creates a safe space for both people to express themselves authentically. When we validate the emotion beneath the words, the argument transforms from a battle of wills into a collaborative effort to meet mutual needs. Addressing the real wound also requires curiosity. Instead of assuming the worst or preparing a rebuttal, we can ask gentle, clarifying questions. I hear your anger. Is there a fear beneath it that I should understand? Or it sounds like you feel unheard. Can you help me understand what that feels like for you? These questions communicate openness and compassion. They shift the energy from accusation to exploration, and in doing so, they invite the other person to step out of defensive patterns and into authentic communication. This approach also cultivates emotional intelligence. It trains us to differentiate between surface behavior and deeper emotional drivers. We learn to see patterns and recognize triggers, both in ourselves and in others. By understanding the underlying needs, we can respond in ways that address the root cause rather than simply reacting to symptoms. This creates healthier interactions and reduces repetitive cycles of conflict. Finally, addressing the real wound beneath the words nurtures connection and intimacy. Relationships thrive not when arguments disappear, but when each person feels seen, understood, and valued, even in disagreement. By focusing on the unmet needs, fears, and vulnerabilities behind the words, we create an environment where both partners can grow, heal, and feel safe to express themselves fully. The conversation ceases to be a contest and becomes a bridge, guiding both individuals toward deeper understanding and a more resilient bond. When we commit to looking beyond the surface, we discover that every argument carries a hidden invitation, an invitation to understand, to empathize, and to heal. The words are just the starting point. The true dialogue lies in the human heart beneath them. Replacing assumptions with questions is one of the most subtle yet powerful ways to transform the way we engage in conflict. When disagreements arise, the human mind instinctively fills in gaps in understanding with assumptions. We assume intentions, motivations, and meanings based on our past experiences, biases, or fears. They are doing this to hurt me, they don't care about my feelings, or they are deliberately ignoring me. These assumptions feel real and urgent, and they shape our responses in ways that escalate tension rather than resolve it. By replacing assumptions with questions, we create space for clarity, curiosity, and connection, and we allow the conversation to reflect truth rather than projection. Assumptions are a form of mental shortcut. Our brains seek to interpret the world quickly, and often we jump to conclusions before we even hear the full story. In relationships, this can be particularly damaging. One offhand comment or action can be misinterpreted as criticism, neglect, or betrayal. The mind fills in the blanks with worst-case scenarios, and suddenly a small misunderstanding transforms into a full-blown argument. What begins as a minor issue becomes magnified because we assume the intention without checking the facts. The consequences are predictable: defensiveness, emotional withdrawal, and escalating conflict. Questions, on the other hand, invite clarity. They slow down the conversation and create a pause where understanding can emerge. Simple questions like, "Can you help me understand what you mean?" Or, "What were you hoping would happen when you said that?" redirect the focus from judgment to exploration. Questions shift the dynamic from accusation to curiosity. They communicate a willingness to listen, to engage, and to understand the perspective of the other person. Instead of reacting to a presumed threat, you respond to information grounded in reality. Replacing assumptions with questions also requires humility. We acknowledge that we do not know everything about the other person's experience or intention. We admit that our perspective is limited, and that our mind may be coloring reality with past hurts or fears. Humility opens the door to learning. It allows us to see the conversation as an opportunity to discover the truth rather than as a battle to prove our correctness. When both partners practice humility through questioning, the interaction shifts from a contest of egos to a shared exploration of needs, desires, and perspectives. Questions also create emotional safety. When someone feels assumed against, they instinctively close down. They feel misrepresented and misunderstood, which triggers defensiveness and often retaliation. When we ask questions instead, we show respect for the other person's inner world. We acknowledge that their perspective matters and that we want to hear it fully. Emotional safety allows for vulnerability, and vulnerability is the doorway to deeper connection and resolution. Moreover, replacing assumptions with questions encourages empathy. When we ask genuinely curious questions, we begin to understand the emotions, needs, and intentions driving behavior. We discover the fears, insecurities, and pressures that may be influencing the other person's words or actions. This insight creates compassion, which transforms conflict from a clash into an opportunity for mutual support and understanding. Finally, questions promote conscious choice. They give us the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Instead of lashing out based on a presumed slight, we can consider the information we are receiving in real time. We gain the power to respond in alignment with our values and intentions rather than being hijacked by assumptions and reactive emotions. By consistently replacing assumptions with questions, we break destructive cycles, foster deeper understanding, and cultivate relationships that are resilient, empathetic, and grounded in truth. In essence, choosing questions over assumptions is an act of mindfulness, respect, and love. It shifts conflict from a battlefield to a dialogue, from misunderstanding to insight, and from reaction to conscious response. It transforms relationships because it prioritizes clarity over judgment, connection over pride, and truth over projection. Every time we pause, inquire, and listen, we make space for authentic communication and lasting harmony. Choosing unity over ego is one of the most transformative principles for navigating conflict in any relationship. Ego thrives on being right, on asserting dominance and on proving that one's perspective carries more weight than the others. It thrives on separation, on division, and on the satisfaction of winning. But relationships at their core are about connection, collaboration, and co-creation. When ego becomes the driving force in conflict, the relationship suffers, even if one wins the argument. Choosing unity over ego means shifting the focus from being right to being connected, from defending self-image to nurturing the bond, and from prioritizing pride to prioritizing purpose. Ego often disguises itself as righteousness. We convince ourselves that standing our ground, winning the debate, or asserting our point is a measure of love, strength, or justice. Yet ego rarely serves the long-term health of the relationship. When we insist on being right, we may momentarily feel powerful, but that power is fleeting, and the relationship bears the cost. Words are sharper, gestures colder, and silence is heavier when ego dictates the interaction. Choosing unity over ego requires awareness, courage, and humility. The courage to step back from the need to dominate. The awareness to recognize when pride is driving our responses, and the humility to place the relationship above individual victories. Unity over ego is not the same as submission or self-denial. It does not mean ignoring your needs, compromising your boundaries, or silencing your voice. Instead, it is a conscious decision to prioritize the health of the relationship while still expressing yourself authentically. It is the willingness to say, "My connection with you matters more than my need to be right." This perspective opens a path for negotiation, understanding, and creative problem-solving. When both people in a relationship embrace unity over ego, conflict becomes a space for collaboration rather than competition. One of the ways ego sabotages connection is by keeping us trapped in defensiveness. When we feel the need to protect our image, status, or pride, every word is filtered through the lens of self-preservation. Criticism feels like an attack. Questions feel like challenges, and mistakes feel like personal failures. Choosing unity over ego interrupts this cycle. It allows us to listen without judgment, to respond without defensiveness, and to engage without the constant fear of being diminished. The moment we place the relationship above the ego, we create a space where authentic communication can thrive. Choosing unity also involves seeing the bigger picture. Conflicts are often small fragments in the larger mosaic of a relationship. Ego tends to magnify the immediate dispute, inflating it into a crisis, whereas unity invites perspective. It asks, how important is this in the context of our bond, our shared life, and our long-term growth? This broader perspective reduces the intensity of disputes and fosters patience, understanding, and forgiveness. It encourages both partners to step outside their immediate reactions and consider the welfare of the relationship as a whole. Unity over ego also fosters emotional intimacy. When both people prioritize connection, they create a sense of safety, trust, and mutual respect. Vulnerability becomes possible because neither partner fears being attacked, invalidated, or diminished. In this environment, disagreements are not threatening. They are opportunities to learn more about each other's needs, values, and inner worlds. Ego, in contrast, builds walls, isolates, and breeds resentment. Choosing unity tears down those walls and cultivates a fertile ground for love, growth, and mutual understanding. Finally, choosing unity over ego transforms the very nature of conflict. Arguments cease to be battles of dominance or tests of strength. They become opportunities to practice empathy, cooperation, and conscious communication. The relationship evolves from a series of confrontations to a partnership where both individuals can express themselves fully while feeling connected, valued, and respected. By consistently placing unity above ego, we create a relational environment that is resilient, compassionate, and deeply satisfying. Ultimately, choosing unity over ego is a conscious act of love, wisdom, and integrity. It requires awareness, patience, and courage, but its rewards are profound. It transforms conflict from a destructive force into a bridge for connection, understanding, and shared growth. By elevating the relationship above the self, we create not only harmony in the moment, but a foundation for lasting trust, intimacy, and mutual respect. Thank you for your time and support. Wishing you all the best in everything you do. Goodbye and take care.